Is this a problem? That's right, today we're talking about Omen and his 82% pick rate at Masters Toronto. This is the second highest pick rate of all time in any international tournament, only being beaten by Jet at Masters Berlin at 85%. But that was back in 2021, and so that means that, all of your peak Chambers, your peak Viper, whatever you think has been, the strongest stupid stuff in Valorant throughout history, well, Omen's pick rate is higher than almost all of it. And you see, what's so interesting about that question of is this a problem is normally if an agent had, even above a 60% pick rate, we'd be talking about, oh yeah, they're probably a problem. 80%, it would be like, obviously they're a massive problem. But with Omen, that isn't quite the case. And we're going to dive in to both sides of that argument. So let's dive in, and we're going to start off with the side that this is not a problem, and these people very much exist. I'm sure they will exist in large numbers of the comments of this video. If you potentially watching this video are also thinking in your head right now, Omen is not a problem, Omen does not need a nerf. And some of the common arguments you will see from this side is that, well, the first one is that Omen is a controller, right? A primary controller at that, and that means that he's gonna get a decent amount of pick rate because whoever the best primary controller is in the game is probably at least gonna have like a 50% pick rate because you have to play a controller. And so the point is that a lot of that pick rate is just guaranteed because you must play a controller. And we've seen, you don't have to play a Sentinel. We've seen that a lot. On certain maps, you definitely don't have to play a Duelist, like on Icebox, for instance. And playing no Initiator definitely is more rare, but there's perhaps more choice there in general. A lot of the Initiators are pretty good, and so they kind of eat away at each other's pick rate. And that leads on to the second argument that people will commonly make as well, which is that the controller class, unlike, say, the Initiator class, just doesn't have a lot of good agents in it. There's Omen, there's Viper, Astra is okay, and then you've got either, very specific agents like Brim or agents that are, just aren't really suited for pro play right now, like Harbor and Clove. And so there just isn't enough competition, so Omen is very clearly the best primary controller, and therefore is just racking up all the pick rates on almost all of the maps. And that brings me on to the third point, which is the map pool, because we had a very specific map pool here at Masters Toronto, which suited Omen, right? There was only one map that you would say is not an Omen map, and that is Pearl, that only got played 3 times, right? So the one map that you don't see a lot of Omen on, yeah, just is the map that just didn't get picked for, a variety of reasons, right? And so this map pool just suits Omen, right? If we had Bind, if we had Fracture in there, this number would be coming down. If you had maybe like a Breeze in there as well, right? Like if that ever came back, this number would come down. And then the final argument you'll see a lot of the time as well is that Omen is just fun. There's no problem with Omen being good because he's fun to play and he's fun to watch. There's a ton of cool stuff that you can do with Omen and people regularly do. And that's cool and that's good and that's what you want to see in the game. And so why would you want to take something out of the game that is just fun? And all of those arguments do have merit, and I think particularly the last one does make a lot of sense when you kind of, dive deep into the weeds of philosophically, what do we want from the balance of a game, right? But now let's take a look at the other side of the argument of why Omen maybe does need some form of changes. And we're going to start off actually by comparing to Teo, because Teo was an agent that everyone agreed needed a nerf, right? Everyone was on board with Teo getting a nerf. But when you compare Teo to Omen in terms of how they are strong, it is very, very different. Because here's the thing, Teo was not good in every single situation of the game, right? If you're a Teo playing on site and you get stunned and flashed and all of that, right, you really don't have a ton of options at your disposal. You can maybe try and stun them as they're coming towards you, but it's not guaranteed that that's going to work, and you very well might die, right? Another instance might be if you're on one side of a certainly a bigger map, let's say Lotus, right? If you're on the A side of Lotus and your opponents are going over towards C, as Teo, well, there's not much you can do, right? You're just not really a help at that moment in time, right? And so again, that's another situation where you aren't doing much. And yet, people still definitely thought that Teo needed enough, and he definitely did, because Teo was a specialist. Teo was very, very good, too good in very certain circumstances, right? In post plants, Teo was way, way, way too good, right? In terms of clearing out areas, Teo was way too good, right? In those areas, he was a 12 out of 10. Right, and that was very obvious to see and very obviously was a problem as well. And so it was agreed by everyone in the community that Teo needed a nerf. And that is where the comparison to Teo is quite interesting, because Teo is a specialist that in certain circumstances is a 12 out of 10, right? Post plant against Teo, good luck. Omen isn't really the same, because Omen isn't like a 12 out of 10 in any specific circumstance. He's more of a generalist that is just like an 8 or 9 out of 10, like all the time, no matter what scenario comes up. And really think about this question, right? In what situation does Omen's utility not give you any potential answers? And really, of common things that happen in Valorant, there isn't too many situations like that. The one maybe you can think of is if you're on a big map and you're standing on one side of it, you can't quite smoke all the way to the other side of the map. That's something that happens sometimes, but really other than that, Omen gives you answers to pretty much anything, whether you want to be aggressive or passive, retreat or go in. Like, Omen will give you an answer of how to do that, and often multiple answers on how to do that. And that is where I think that Omen is underrated, because I think most people would just say, you know, yeah, Omen's got smokes and the TPs, they're like fine, they're like whatever. And yeah, that's true. In most situations, those abilities are like fine, right? They're okay abilities in terms of the impact that they provide most of the time. However, the point is that because it's Omen and the way you can use those abilities in so many different ways, again, whilst they might just be okay in a lot of scenarios, they're okay in a lot of scenarios, right? And that is very different to most agents in the game. Most agents don't have answers to specific things in the game. That's how most agents are designed, that they have a weakness. But that's the thing. Omen has no weakness. And that's true of the TPs and the smokes, that they might a lot of the time just be okay. But the paranoia is not just okay, right? The paranoia is arguably, I would argue this, the single strongest non-ult ability in the entire game. And there is another thing that is unique to Omen only in this game, in that every other flash in the game has some counterplay. Right? You can shoot or turn every other flash in the game. And when we're talking about the highest levels of the game, well, it turns out that those players tend to be pretty good at turning and shooting flashes. But Omen's, you can't. And yeah, it is only a near sight, but let's be real, a lot of the time, if you get hit by that Omen flash, you're still gonna die. And now let's talk about Omen's ult, because I think that this one plays into that community belief that Omen is absolutely fine. One of the reasons for that is, of course, ults are meant to be strong abilities. They're ultimates. So of course they're meant to be strong abilities, right? But the thing is, when you play against like a Raze or particularly like a Neon ult, and you die to that Neon ult, running around, zapping you, all that stuff, right? It's a feels bad moment. It's a like, this ult, right? Like, it doesn't feel good to play against. Whereas no one has ever been up against an Omen ult and thought, oh, that doesn't feel good to play against. Right? Everyone's like, yeah, it's fine. No one cares. It's not that strong. And so you don't get that kind of like, it feels bad to play against moment when you're against an Omen ult, because it's just not that great. But there's a couple truths I want to point out about ults in general and the Omen ult. When it comes to the ults in general, ults just aren't quite as important as other abilities when it comes to overall agent strength. It's not that they aren't important at all. They do have some importance, but of course you only use them a certain amount of time in a game, right? You might only use them 2-3 times in an entire game. Whereas the other abilities you're going to use, you know, pretty much every round. And if you go back through time and think about the strongest agents that we've had, let's take Teo as our example, they don't always have like amazing ults. They generally have, you know, ults that are useful, but not like amazing, you know, not the best ults in the game. And Teo is a good example of that, of an agent that had an ult that is, you know, fine. But also when it comes to the Omen ult in general, I do think, kind of like the rest of Omen's kit, it does go a little bit under the radar of how useful it can be at times, right? Because again, when you Omen ult to pick up the spike, for instance, and you get into a post plant like a 1v2 or a 1v1 that we have seen happen countless times, right? Both in probably your ranked games and pro games as well, when they go to pick up the spike. I think people underestimate the ult because the ult itself only picks up the spike, right? So when you just look at it like, what did that ult do? Picking up the spike, you know, is like, who cares? But the thing is, if you think about a win probability chart of those rounds where Omen, you know, ults to pick up the spike, the win probability in some of those rounds is literally like 0%. And by Omen ulting the spike, it can go up to, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70% potentially. If you're on the other side of the map and now a 1v1, you're probably favored getting the spike after you get the spike down. That Omen ult potentially took a 0% round to a 70% round, which is a way bigger swing than pretty much any other ult is going to give you in almost any situation. And that's the thing. I'm not arguing that the Omen ult is good, but when you think about it in terms of those terms, in terms of win probability of a certain round, the Omen ult can actually sometimes be literally the most valuable ult in terms of winning a round ever. And the great thing about playing Omen is when you do pick up the spike and go and plant it, oh, congratulations, you're now playing the best agent that you could for that situation as well, because you got smokes, you got paranoia, you got TPs, which all are going to be useful again, because Omen is useful in every single situation. And so that is where we are with Omen. And so to answer the question, is it a problem? I personally would say yes. I would say that the paranoia is just kind of universally too good. It doesn't really follow the rules of the other flashes in the game, and therefore it should be nerfed. That's my personal opinion. A lot of other people, though, I know will be saying we just need to buff the other controls. And I do need to take a bit of an issue with that general statement of buffing the other controls will fix this problem, because I don't think it will fix this problem. All that I think that buffing the other controllers will do, and that's not to say that some of them don't need a buff, like Harbor obviously does need buffs, don't get me wrong. But all that will do is, if you don't touch Omen, is just create a double controller meta. The Omen is still a major part of. Because again, Omen's problem lies in the fact that he's good in every situation. Why would I not play an agent that is good in every situation? And that is the thing. Yes, you can buff the other controllers all you want, but either you're going to break the game by buffing them too much, or you're just going to create a complete double controller meta that Omen is still the main focal point of.